Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever the Zoom platform finds you today. I'm so thrilled to welcome you to this session that we have for the symposium today. My name is Christin McConnell. I'm an education specialist at the Global Partnership for Education, and I am so pleased to be here as your moderator for the Literacy League panel today. My role at GPE is I'm wearing several hats at the moment. I am the thematic leads for our portfolios on early learning as well as ed tech. So that matches up very, very well with our panel today. But also I am acting for our lead for gender equality. And I appreciate that doing some research on our panelists today that I think gender equality will be a theme that comes up in several points as well. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panelists today. We have three great organizations that I'm very much looking forward to hearing from. Each organization will take about 3 to 5 minutes to give you a bit of a background of what they do. And then I have several questions prepared for each panelist to speak on, but I really want to make this interactive and engaged with the audience. So please, please, please feel free to use the chat function and type out your questions that you have for the full panel or any panelist in particular. And we have space in our program today to get to that. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our first organization that we'll feature, which is Worldreader. So here today we have Deborah Backus, who's the Senior Director for Global Impact, as well as Joan and Mwachi, who's the Regional Director of East Africa for Worldreader. So turning it over to you, Deborah and Joan, if you can give us a brief introduction to your work at Worldreader.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here today, and it's great to see so many familiar names. It's nice to at least be virtual together. I'm Deborah Backus, the Senior Director of Global Impact at Worldreader, here with my colleague Joan. I'm just going to kick us off. Worldreader has been around since 2010, and we support underserved communities with digital reading solutions to help improve learning outcomes. And if you want to scan the QR code in the bottom of my screen, you can go right to BookSmart wherever you are in the world. Over the years, we've reached about 19 million readers in 62 countries, but we work primarily in Peru, the US, which we launched in 2020, Ghana, Kenya, India, and in the Middle East. And as an ever-evolving edtech organization, starting with e-readers and now being completely mobile, we're always evolving. And I would say that our evolution at this stage really aligns with what we call our ABCD model. We like learning, we like it easy. And so A is really around giving access to books using our reading applications. The one that you'll be able to scan on my screen is BookSmart, and that's for our early learners. And they're really optimized for wide usage, both online and offline for mobile on mobile devices, whether a mobile phone or a tablet. And then the next thing is B, and B is around books. And we have a library of over 9,000 high quality digital books. We actually have books from Pratham, who's also on the call here today. And we curate these books to create, really inspiring and engaging learning journeys for children. And then the C is our continuous engagement. And this is an area where we continue to evolve, but really supporting the reader in, increasing outreach to the reader, increasing outreach to parents, building the development more recently of reading activities. So, a lot of our books have SEL, social and emotional learning activities that align with the books and pop up for parents to engage with their children. We have in-app and out-of-app digital reminders. We work a lot with WhatsApp through teacher groups or parent groups to really encourage them to read, to give them direct links to books. And then our D is our data, and we collect real-time data through our applications at all times. So we're able to really understand reading habits and can monitor, how much time is spent reading frequency, and the number of readers. And so this is a little bit about our model, and Joanne's going to tell us a little bit about how we use this model in different contexts.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I didn't realize that. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. So happy to see you here. Happy to see also quite a number of familiar names. Thank you, Deborah, for the introduction. We use our model in different ways, as Deborah has mentioned. We are looking at both communities and looking at families and looking at schools. The current model allows us to really have an increased engagement between schools and home, bringing parents into the fold. We are working in environments where typically parents see teaching and learning as an activity that takes place in school. But with our BookSmart app, we are able to use the school to reach the parents in the home and to get them much more involved in what the children are doing. We are currently working with the Ecd Centers and primary schools using the applications that we have. I think I can stop there and give other organizations an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then we can continue with the conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Deborah and Joanne. It was really a pleasure to hear that introduction. I'll turn it now over to Purvi Shah from Pratham Books. She's the Senior Director for StoryWeaver and Strategy. Purvi, if you could please give us a brief introduction to Pratham Books.
Hey, thanks, Christine, and good evening to all my fellow panelists and everybody who's joined us at several different time zones here. So I'm with Pratham Books, StoryWeaver. Pratham Books is a not-for-profit children's book publisher based out of India. We're about 17 years old. We are a non-profit publishing house. And way back in 2008, we started open licensing our content. So we were one of India's and perhaps the world's first children's book publisher to start open licensing content. And from the idea and the power of what open licenses could do, for children's literature and books in mother tongue languages, we actually came up with the idea of creating StoryWeaver, which is a digital platform that allows users from anywhere in the world, whether they're on a mobile or a desktop or a laptop, to read books for free, to create books for free. We have a large image library of about 30,000-40,000 images, all under open license, Creative Commons licenses. Users can also translate books into any language of the world. So we launched StoryWeaver with 800 books in 24 languages in 2015. But today we are at about 38,000 books in about 303 languages. And we have a large user base of about 6 million users who are regular on StoryWeaver. Having said that, I think a few things that I want to talk about today is that one used to get so excited to tell this story pre-COVID times, right? It's still like a very exciting story to tell, but the pandemic really shook us. And in the last 2 years, much like all the other panelists, being in EdTech and being a digital player allowed us a lot of opportunities. And one of the things that we were able to do last year is that as soon as the first, in March, April, when the first phase hit, we were able to curate and create new things on the platform to serve users from different countries that were really, really badly impacted because of COVID. So to be able to allow children from all over the world to access content and read beautiful stories of hope and love and compassion during those times has been extremely heartening. We've also done huge large-scale partnerships, and the last 2 years have really opened up the EdTech space and adoption for digital resources. And we are very keen now to see how stories can play a critical part in foundational learning and help sort of bridge this huge learning gap that has kind of come about in the last 2 years. So I'll just take a pause there, Christin.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Purvi. Last but not least, I'll turn it over to Amanda Medcalf, who's the editor and senior advisor from onebillion. Amanda, if you can give us a brief introduction to your work at onebillion.
Thanks, Christin, and thanks everyone. As I totally agree, Purvi, I think there's a lot of exciting things we can be doing to help close this education gap that's happened not only over the last year or two, but obviously before then. We know we're in this global learning crisis that we're all trying to solve. So onebillion is a non-profit organization. We're based in the UK and Nigeria, and we develop comprehensive EdTech solutions for children to learn to read and become numerate in their local language.
or their local language of instruction. And we don't just want children to learn how to read, we want them to become lifelong readers, so they will become lifelong learners. Our software One Course is designed to take children from zero. So that's sort of, can't recognize a number, can't recognize a letter, to confidently numerate and reading with comprehension. The software adapts to the child's level, and it's delivered on OneTabs, which is our low-cost EdTech devices, which are designed to deliver learning to the child wherever they are, whether they've got an internet connection or not. And whether they have suitable scaffolding or not, we want them to be able to learn. So they can learn both at home and at school, which has obviously been incredibly important over the past 18 months or so. So you can hear a little bit more about some of our implementations working with partners. I think my colleague Nat will be chatting in a couple of hours on the EdTech Hub research hour. So you can hear more about that then. But today, what I really want to focus on is the newest addition to our EdTech solutions, which is OneTest. So this is our rapid literacy and numeracy assessment that can be used by teachers, ministries, researchers, and NGOs. So OneTest quickly gives both the child's overall score in literacy and numeracy, as well as their level in individual sub-skills. So it can be used by a number of stakeholders for their purposes. So for example, the different sub-skills might be number discrimination and addition and subtraction in the numeracy side of things. But then we also are testing listening comprehension, phonological awareness, and reading comprehension in the reading assessment. So the test is really easy to set up and it requires minimal training. And so it was developed in-house at 1 Billion with input from pedagogy experts, partners, researchers, and of course the real experts in all of this, the children themselves. So facilitators, whether that's a parent at home, a teacher, a researcher, can add children's names and teachers can add classes as well, and select a reading or maths test and then hand the device to the child. And that's it, that's all they need to do. We found from our testing in Malawi that actually children who'd never even used a device before sort of instinctively managed to answer the questions without needing any further support. But we hope that you will be able to try we'll send you a download link and we hope you'll be able to try it and tell us if you think any improvements, like a bit more in digital literacy, will be required. So once children have done the test, you get a really clear breakdown showing just the overall test score and also these levels for the breakdown. So then it's really easy for a teacher, for example, to say, okay, that child is struggling in that particular area. Maybe I'll give them a little bit of support on that, or they might be struggling overall, or the whole class might be struggling on, for example, in English, they might be struggling to decode simple CVC words. So the teacher can use the resources that they have to help either individual children or the whole class. And it's designed to be really simple in that way. So as well as being available as part of One Course and on OneTabs, OneTest is available as a standalone app. So please do get in touch with me if you'd like the download link. I think it will be live shortly, because we'd really love everyone to test it out and to sort of give us some feedback. And we as well will be working with researchers to validate against existing assessments and to normalize as well. So we'll be looking to our researchers to advise on that. I think, the point about OneTest is 1 Billion developed it because we needed a way to really quickly find out, are these interventions working? We know how much money is spent in this area, but we need to quickly find out if something is working or not. So we can use OneTest as baseline and endline and quickly say, okay, that's not quite working. Maybe we can tweak this and to make sure we're delivering something that really works for the child.
Great, thank you so much, Amanda. Really insightful, and I think our participant numbers are growing by the second. So welcome to anyone who's new. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we turn it over to a wider panel discussion. One, if you can please do so and introduce yourself in the chat. I think that'll make it feel a little bit more of a community and interactive. Second, please feel free to use the chat to pose any questions directly to our panelists or ones that you would potentially like all three panelists to answer. I've set aside time in our program today to get questions from the audience, so I really want to make sure those are there. So as one of the panelists is speaking, if something occurs to you, feel free to jot it down in the chat so we can refer to it later. So I have a couple of questions for our panelists today. The first is one that some of you already touched on a little bit in your presentation, but maybe we can do a slightly deeper dive here, is I would love to hear how your tools or materials are empowering the larger community towards a culture of reading. This came up in some of your points, but particularly I'm curious, how much of this has been a shift since the COVID-19 pandemic versus maybe what you were doing previously. For this one, it'd be great if we could start with Purvi.
Thanks, Christine. Yeah, I think that's a great question, right? Because post the pandemic, we did see a huge increase in digital uptake, because everywhere we could see that there was a lack of resources. Libraries were shut down. We had this sweetest email from somebody in France. I mean, they're very privileged community, but libraries were shut. They didn't have stories. So StoryWeaver kind of opened up this digital library for her and her children to kind of read at home and be engaged. Similarly, in India, we had a fantastic intervention with UNICEF and the Ministry of Education in a very large state here in India called Maharashtra. And this was with children from public schools. They were out of school. They had absolutely no resources at home, and they were completely devoid of any learning or engagement. So the idea was, how do you create a buzz around reading? How do you keep these children engaged? And we actually leveraged WhatsApp as a channel. So we created a campaign called in the local language, but in English it loosely translates into Saturday of Stories. And every Saturday, a WhatsApp link with a book on StoryWeaver and an activity would go to the district coordinators. From there, it would go to the various teacher groups, and from there, it would go to the parents. And what happened over this 20-week engagement during the pandemic was that we started getting these beautiful stories from the field of grandparents starting to narrate stories again, of fathers coming back from work and immediately opening up their mobiles, because they would always have only one mobile in the house. So fathers opening up their mobile and saying, let's see what story is there to read today. So these are all great stories of change that we heard during the pandemic. And in India, particularly with the new education policy that got launched last year in 2020, there is a huge focus now on reading for joy and reading and having like a reading period in every week in the classroom. So we've just launched a massive campaign with the Central Board of Secondary Education in India here, where across 25,000 schools, we are hoping to get teachers reading every week in the classroom using stories. I'm happy to come back with more examples, but I want to make sure that Deborah and Amanda get over.
Thank you, Purvi. That was very inspiring. I particularly love the focus on the reading for joy piece. All right, Amanda, do you mind hopping in and answering on behalf of 1 billion?
Yeah, of course, I'd love to. Purvi, again, totally agree. I think, the beating heart of what we do certainly is trying to instill this love of stories in children, because we know the benefits to that. I mean, obviously all of us in this literacy league know the benefits of that. So I think, just taking it aside from the pandemic for a second, in one course, we make sure that stories are at the heart of everything that we do. So in every adaptive lesson that a child gets, they will get a story pitched at their level. But they will also always have access to the full range of stories from our library. So these really cover a range of levels, cultures, themes, and we've got a mix of stories written in-house at 1 billion, but also from, the amazing range of open source story libraries, including, obviously, we've got a whole bunch from StoryWeaver, from Pratham. So children will always have access to those. And I think when we look at what's happened in the pandemic, so it's really accelerated the home learning model, and it's something that we've been talking about for a while. It's something we can really see the benefits of, particularly in low resource contexts. And so if children can have one of these where they've got 160 illustrated stories just available that they can explore in their own time, I think that makes a real difference to how their literacy evolves and becomes something that they're going to do for the rest of their lives. And in terms of the community aspect of that, when these devices are in the home, we know children are very rarely actually on their own. When we've been in communities, we know as soon as a child has a one tab in their hands, their siblings flocked over, or their friends have flocked over, and they're all learning together. And the parents as well, we know we've had illiterate parents who have been using one tabs as well to improve their own literacy. And when you can get those stories all together, it's something we've always sort of built in, is children having access to these stories. And we know that, they will read them with their parents. The parents can ask questions, or they can ask questions together to really engage with those stories. And we have some evening stories as well, which are audio only, to just chill out and listen to in an evening all together.
Great, thank you, Amanda. Now turning over to Deborah and Joan.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I think, thank you, Amanda and Purvi, were aligned in a lot of what we were doing. I think so many of us in ed tech were kind of already on this path, but it just pushed us forward a lot faster. And I can say the same for Worldreader. I mean, before the pandemic, I would say we're predominantly in schools and libraries. We had, we were working towards this path of greater community engagement, but it just pushed us along a lot farther. So in March of 2020, we launched a new application that was really just targeted for those early learners. We already had it built, but it created a great opportunity to open it globally, and it really focused on kind of the 0 to 12-year-olds. And we launched reading campaigns in each of the countries that we were working. So we did a lot of national promotion around free access to our solution. We were promoting books of the week that families could engage with. And then we've just continued to build off of that. So throughout this year with those books, we've been building kind of wraparound support for those books. So building learning activities that can be done with parents at home. We have, with our weekly books, we have 3 activities. One is around, your reading skills. So can you find repeated words? Can you find words that start with a T? That kind of thing. And then activities that focus on social and emotional learning. So, there's a lovely little book, I think from Book Dash, that a little girl is exploring her own identity and kind of understanding who she is. And the SEL activity for that is, look at your child in the face and tell them the things you like about their face, and tell your parent the things they like about your face. So these really simple activities that don't require any kind of materials, but allow a parent and child to kind of interact with the book. And then the last one is a play-based activity. And again, there's one about ladybugs, and it's kind of like create a little ladybug with a piece of paper and have a ladybug race. So really just getting the children to interact. And I think, that's been a big piece of what we've done throughout this past year. And then just kind of continue to build on that. We have been exploring different ways to get communities engaged. And we actually partnered with CARE in Egypt and did this 8-week reading competition. And that was a really powerful opportunity because so many teachers and librarians and others got to volunteer within the community, to go to homes, to show parents how to download our app. We had WhatsApp groups where we were pushing out on Fridays, the holy day where people were often at home as families eating together. We were pushing out, a book of the week and activities, and the spike was huge. We could see through our data so much reader engagement. And I think we had targeted about 600 families, and we had over 720 that were reading. But I mean, just like Amanda said, with one device, we saw pictures of, 5 children sitting around with one father reading together. And engaging with the books in that way. The children, the activities that we gave them, required them to think about their communities and things they would like to do. So they were sending videos and messaging through the app. And I think because it was like community oriented, it became kind of a bit of a competition. And then there was a lot of incentives. They were going to get certificates and they were going to get recognition from the school and the local ministries. So I think just anything, we try to look at that community engagement of like nudges as well as incentives, and then just ongoing kind of encouragement, both in an app and outside of the app, And I think Joanne has linked a few of our case studies in the chat. You can see kind of some work we did in Egypt as well as in Peru throughout the pandemic, following a similar model. And just to build off, I saw in the chat, someone was asking about how we engaged with ministries of education, and Peru is a really good example. If you want to look at that case study, we were supposed to launch in schools in Peru in 2020, and with the pandemic we couldn't, so we very quickly started talking to the ministry, collaborating with the ministry, and we're able to kind of get our solution out as a reading option, and the ministry was very supportive.
I think one comment, just a quick comment I'd like to add to what Deborah has presented is around that community bond. As she did the introduction, she mentioned that we work in under-resourced areas in developing countries, mostly sub-Saharan Africa, and of course within South America and within India. The community bond is very strong in these areas, and many of these households do not have enough of any resource. But through that community bond, you will get one household that has one item and another that has something else. So it is possible for us, for example, to have reading sessions where a parent doesn't have data, a parent may not have a data-enabled phone, but the neighbor has it. And so the neighbor does the reading program for the 5 or 7 children, neighborhood kids who are part of a program, and with other secondary beneficiaries who may be in that area. So basically leveraging on that bond that's already in existence to bring these underserved communities into the fold. Obviously supported with a lot of training on the teacher's part so that they actually know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it as they bring the parents on board and increase the levels of engagement.
Thank you, Joanne and Deborah. That was really great. And overall, I think all 3 organizations, that was incredibly inspiring to really hear how it's become such of a community focus, and that your outreach is maybe broader now than you initially anticipated, just because of that community aspect. And it's really great to see how it's fostering this culture of reading beyond just children to, as you mentioned, maybe illiterate family, illiterate parents or other family members. That's wonderful. So picking up on something that Deborah mentioned, we were talking about some of your work with the Ministry of Education in Peru. Along that line, I would like to kind of steer our next group of questions to the panelists, or this main question, to be really about any examples of what sort of strategies have been successful as you're scaling your work. That might not necessarily be at the scale of nationwide with the ministry, but it would be great to kind of hear some of your examples for that. I think for this question, I'll start with Amanda, then turn it over to Deborah and Joanne, and end with Purvi. So Amanda, over to you. Thanks,
Christin. So I think, it's an important question, the one of scale, obviously, if we're going to achieve SDG 4. I think our experience at 1 billion of localizing one course for different languages has really helped us when we start to look at one test. I think, one course is enormous, and we, in order to maintain the quality when we localize, which is obviously a key question when it comes to scaling, we want to make sure we maintain that quality. So we're working with local pedagogy experts to make sure that our curriculum is going to be the most effective for those, the new target children. But we've also got the kind of technical sides that are happening on the side as well, like the translation, the voiceover artists, and how we can work with them. So with one test, it's a sort of considerably smaller undertaking in terms of the number of items to be translated and recorded than one course. And our in-house tools that we're developing can help us streamline that process to make sure that we are spending as much of the time and focus we have when we look at a new place that we want to localize for, working with local pedagogy experts to make sure that we're really maintaining that high standard. We're really getting the pedagogy right when we localize. So at the moment we're in French, Swahili, Chichewa, and then we've got 2 versions of English available at the moment for one test. But we expect, and we've sort of designed it we've designed one course to be more easily localizable so that everyone can use it. From a technical standpoint as well, we've also taken the decision with One Test to make it available on all Android devices. So its smaller size has made that possible to make easily available as a download. So anyone can use it on their device. And whereas with one course, we're trying to increase the child's time on task. So we need more devices per child, more children, fewer children per device. We also, with One Test, one teacher can have one device and download it there. So the cost is sort of smaller with that particular aspect, which is going to make scaling a lot easier in that respect. So I think it's just about looking at what the needs are for each sort of initiative and how can we make sure that we're delivering the value for the cost.
Perfect. Thank you, Amanda. All right, Deborah or Joan or Joanne, do you want to hop in here? I know you answered a little bit about scaling with the Peru example, but didn't know if you had more to expand upon.
Well, I can take this one. One of our strategic, what am I looking for? Well, what we are doing is looking for strategic partners who are probably operating at national scale. That really helps us get the word out there. And we bring our expertise to the program, which leaves them free to carry out their expertise in whatever it is they are doing. And then we can become their sort of digital reading partner. Also looking at partnerships with ministries, looking at INGOs, looking at engagement practices such as using radio, national radio, looking at opportunities within resources that the ministries of education have provided. For example, in Kenya during the pandemic, the ministry quickly put together lessons that were delivered over radio, TV, and messages went around over WhatsApp. So piggybacking on those opportunities and actually using that primary messaging to alert parents about the resources that are available through the Ministry of Education, but also the additional resources that Worldreader is providing in terms of reading on devices they actually already own. If you look at the data for a country like Kenya, for example, mobile penetration is something like at 104%. Obviously more than 100% because we have quite a number of people who have dual SIM. And so there is a real opportunity there in terms of getting engagement through the mobile phone, having the books easily accessible, training teachers, and we are able to scale up the model based on the successes that are happening on the ground. Oh, one more that I almost forgot to mention, I'm sorry about that, is engagement and partnership with telcos. Telcos, of course, have huge databases of users. We have partnerships with telcos such as MTN in Ghana. We are working with Jio in India. We have our app on Opera Mini. We have the app on Vodafone that allows us then to provide free access to these, free to use access to the books on the devices that people would ordinarily be using in their homes.
Thank you, Joanne. And just a quick follow-up question on that. So you mentioned that it was helpful that the Kenyan government did radio messaging and other messaging. How were then users connected to Worldreader? Was that part of their messaging? Or how exactly did you take advantage of that national level messaging to connect more readers with Worldreader?
That was not the direct part of the messaging, but because the government was urging everyone to really pivot and use the digital resources, we had an opportunity through our own networks to complement that message by promoting free resources that were available for reading through what happens typically in in Kenya, and I think I've seen it in other countries as well, is that schools form WhatsApp groups. So the teacher has a WhatsApp group with parents, and the head teacher has WhatsApp groups with teachers and what have you. And so getting the message through those channels so that there is awareness around these resources.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. And made me think of my own WhatsApp group with my own children's teachers. It's global now. Purvi, can I turn over to you to talk about kind of your experience with the scaling?
Yeah, definitely. So it's a culmination of many things that Amanda and Joanne have talked about, but maybe I'll give it the StoryWeaver spin. I think one of the things that one of the strategies that we've used in design thinking for the platform, be it in the way it's designed, the user experiences or the collaborations, is we've actually distributed the ability to solve. We need to reach 600 million children who are not reading at their grade level. We need to be able to have everyone be a part of the problem and be a solver within that problem. So by allowing this platform where the agency is moved back to educators, to translators, to creators, to kind of create content that they need in the languages that they need, has really been a game changer. The scale from 24 languages to 303, a large percentage of which are vulnerable, endangered, and marginalized, is extremely important and crucial to the work that we do. So by shifting the agency and allowing everybody to solve the problem with us, I think has been one of our great levers for scale. The other again is having an inclusive strategy via an offline and online strategy for consumption. So while if you have internet and you have infrastructure, of course, you can always be online, but we know that the reality is far from having internet access for every child all the time. So we have invested in technology that allows children and teachers to have an offline library, and they can save books in their offline library. So the time that you have connectivity, you save books, and then you can read those books at your time without internet. And that's one of the reasons why when we did this big collaboration with the Ministry of Education in India, in Maharashtra, we had 2.5 million children engaged with us over 20 weeks. They used the offline library. There were teachers who downloaded PDFs and then shared. So we kind of didn't mandate how the usage happened. We actually, again, left the agency to the teachers to decide what worked best at the ground level. Quickly talking about what Joanne talked about, various strategies that were used on the ground to reach the child, and loudspeakers, radio. We had a very innovative campaign called Give a Missed Call and Hear a Story. So there were state lines that were running, and any child could just give a missed call and hang up. So it's of no cost to them, and the phone rings back and you can hear the story in your language. So that's been a very successful campaign as well. I think the third thing that has helped us scale our model is being very agile in our work. So we look at data, we see the trends, and we're able to customize content, we're able to group content, we're able to scale content. And our own insights from what we saw in the last year or so, we were able to launch a foundational literacy program, perhaps the first one maybe in 2 Indian languages, where we've actually had pedagogy experts create a 6-level framework, and across those 6 levels, choose books that work for each level. And then for each of those books, there are language learning outcomes that are mapped, and there are worksheets that the child can do, and there are progress trackers, there are audio video books. So it's a whole package. And the reason that we could kind of scale this really quickly is because we were agile, and we could see that there was a need right now for a program like this here in India.
Thank you, Purvi. That's great. If I can abuse my position as moderator and ask you a quick follow-up question, it was great to hear your agile method. I think some of the options you mentioned, the missed call was brilliant. I don't think I've ever heard of that before, but I could see how well that works. Just curious, if you still think there's kind of a marginalized population that you aren't reaching at the moment, of kind of what are kind of your current thinking about reaching a particular group?
I love that question, Christine, because it brings back to when we launched StoryWeaver years back and we started open licensing our content years back. There was a question in a lot of people's mind that will digital kind of overtake what we do in print, because we're also a publisher, right? We also print and distribute books. And what we've seen in the last 1 year is that we've seen a lot of organizations from tribal communities, from marginalized communities use their mobile phone to translate on the platform. And then they've been able to actually raise funds to print those books with us and take it back to the child. So I think it's a beautiful, beautiful circle where we use digital to kind of increase the quality of books, increase the number of books, or books in a language that were never ever available. We have this beautiful story of this girl called Manisha from the Gond tribe, and they speak Gondi, and she had never seen a physical book in her mother tongue language. But because there were volunteers who used their mobile phone to translate a book, eventually they could find a funder to kind of print the book. So I think that's been really nice to see.
No, that's a beautiful story. So we have a little bit, I have one final question for the group, but I want to kind of save that to the end and open it up more widely to the audience. I've seen a few questions that I think have mostly already been answered. So if you do have a question, please type in the chat and I can get to you. But in the meantime, I think there's been some exchange, at least on the chat, between our panelists. So I want to open it up to our panelists if they want to ask a question directly to another panelist. Now's a great time.
I'll jump in. I mean, this isn't really a direct question, but I think we've all learned through COVID the importance of trying to figure out creative ways to do engagement, and it's like driving families, driving communities to a solution that's helping them learn. Purvi, I love some of the examples you gave, Amanda, as well, but I just love to hear from the other panelists, like how as organizations do you think about that engagement piece, and where do you see kind of creative opportunities as we kind of move, like as we continue to build off what we've learned over this past year. We had to be so creative. Where do you see yourself going in regards to this kind of engagement piece that really gets people engaging with the solution, engaging with learning in a more targeted way, when there's so many other priorities on people's minds?
If I can jump in first on this one, Deborah, it's a really great question. I think we've all sat in webinars over the past year and a half where we sort of said, what is COVID going to do to change the way that we work and things? And I think one thing for us that we've looked at is in the implementation model. Like, it's given us an opportunity to look at learning in the community, which we know, as I've sort of already touched on, has brought about more engagement. It's brought the parents in to be involved, and I think it's we want the communities to own this solution, and that involves the whole network of a community. But then we can also look at the different areas we're working in and try and find that sort of recipe, if you like, for what's going to work the best for the child. And that sort of involves three kind of areas. It's is the software, how can we tweak it? And these are the things we're hoping to find out, what changes need to happen there. It's in terms of the hardware, is that working in that particular environment? Are these solar panels doing what they're meant to do to charge the device, etc.? And then it's sort of everyone around it. So do we, for example, give a sort of pack to a community? Do we give it to a parent and say, here's your OneTab, here's a selection of books, or whoever, whichever partners we're working with? Do we do it that way? Do we do it through the schools? But I think to what COVID has kind of given us the opportunity to do is to look at those new ways of doing things. And I think we're not ruling anyone out yet, but I think it certainly made us think again about which ways are the best ways to get the child the time on task, which are the best ways to make this work for the child. And it's the child who needs to be at the center. It's not the stakeholder, the other stakeholders who are involved. It's not the facilitators, but obviously to work for the child, it needs to work for the facilitator. So I think really it's just given us an opportunity to step back and say, okay, well, which works, and and given us opportunities to try those out.
Deborah, I'd like to go to the basics on this one, back to the basics on this one. And I'd like to quote Neil Gaiman. We love this quote, his quote of his at Pratham Books. So he says that the simplest way to make sure that we raise literate children is to teach them to read and to show them that reading is a pleasurable activity. And that means finding, that means at its simplest finding books that they enjoy, giving them access to these books, and then just letting them read. So I think as you know, I still feel content is king. So as publishers, if we can innovate and create beautiful storybooks, I think that itself is the first step to ensure that the child is coming back asking for more and more and more. And tech, of course, will always give you ways to, use algorithms and predict what the child may want to read. But I think if we can just weave these beautiful narratives with beautiful illustrations set in the child's context, or if the books can always be doors, windows, and mirrors to different worlds for the child as well, I think engagement will just happen.
And Pratham has empowered all of us to reach more children with beautiful stories.
Thanks, Deborah. I had to say this one because it's something that we always keep kind of talking about.
Joanne, I didn't know if maybe with the engagement piece, if you want to share a little bit about kind of the Ecd Centers and how we're.
Yeah, I'd love to share what we are doing. Again, we've talked about working in under-resourced communities and made a conscious effort to leverage that community bond. And so within the Ecd Centers, we have identified a number of them. We've actually provided them with what we are calling a digital package. It consists of a tablet and a projector. The tablet we use to download the stories, BookSmart, and then with the projector, we can able to project. And like Purvi mentioned, story time becomes lots and lots and lots of fun. There is a lot of peer learning. There is a lot of engagement in terms of what the children can, tell each other and experience as they have conversations with their teachers. It also brings, it also creates sort of like an inclusive environment where the quieter kids, for whatever reason, kids who would not be involved in that lesson get involved. That digital package is also really important in bringing on board parents who are low literate or illiterate. Because what happens is when these kind of programs are ongoing, they shy away because they do not have that skill of reading. But through this digital package, we are able to bring the parents on board and really teach them how to take, say, wordless storybooks that are available on the application, how they can take that wordless storybook and engage with their children. And as Purvi mentioned earlier also, we can be able to download the stories in advance, save them in a library. And so the parent can have 2 to 3 weeks worth of content to engage with before they come back into the school. We use the schools as the centers of distribution of data. Come into the school, download what needs to be done, receive some training from the teacher, get some ideas around how they will roll out activities in the house, and then they go ahead and do it. And then we can be able to get a lot of qualitative feedback from these engagement pieces. We do get schools that are not involved in the programs reaching out to us and saying, where do I register? I want to be a part of that program, which means they're actually seeing the benefit of that community within, the benefit of that program within the community. The other thing is we have what we call a community of practice. We have WhatsApp groups. We have group emails and whatnot. WhatsApp groups are the most active, where we have members of different projects sort of come together on one particular WhatsApp group, and they have discussions. They have these queries that are raised there, and we encourage members to respond as opposed to Worldreader staff responding. thereby building a lot of, basically strengthening the capacity of these teachers, of these parents, to be much more effective, efficient, and impactful within their own communities.
Thank you, Joan. And as someone who primarily works on early childhood education, that example sunk to my heart. And I'm thinking of, especially what you're talking about, the projectors, as we're trying to, have children return to school and be in more socially distanced environments, that the projection actually allows, a storybook in a classroom setting to be more engaged with everyone, no matter kind of where they're sitting in the classroom. So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to leave space right now for kind of a quick lightning round of questions. So yeah, for each of our panelists, if you can answer in a minute and a half, keep our answers relatively short. But the question I'd love to ask you is, assuming that resources were not an issue, right? You had more financial leeway and more, human resources than you have at the moment. What is one thing you would change or add about your model to further solve the learning crisis? Maybe Deborah and Joanne, if I could turn it over to you to begin.
Go ahead, Deborah.
I mean, I think just off that question that I asked, I think we just continue to build in greater engagement in the community, whether that's through, national level kind of reading campaigns to get people excited about how to read with their children and providing access to books. I think if resources were unlimited, we'd have a community facilitator in every neighborhood that was going around and helping facilitate story time with children and parents. We're all in the tech world, but we see the value of an individual human working with children. So I think we just continue to build off of that, increasing touch points with a child so that they feel inspired by learning.
If resources were not an issue at all, I would launch a behavior change campaign to really open up the minds of parents that teaching and learning is not something that happens in schools only. It's not the responsibility of teachers only. It's also the responsibility of the parent to be engaged in what the child is doing. So I would do a whole behavior change campaign to bring many more parents on board.
Love to hear it. Purvi, could I turn it over to you? What would you do if you had unlimited resources? What's one thing you would change?
I also want to do what Joanne wants to do. So I'll tell you what I want to do, but we also want to do what Joanne wants to do. So yes, if we had unlimited resources, what we would like to do, we'd like to do two things. We'd like to, one, partner with all possible organizations in the world and create books in 600, 700, 1,000, 2,000 languages, but at the same time be able to not only translate the books, but contextualize the images also, and perhaps also have a lot of stories that come from the child's immediate environment as well, something that is not always possible when you're only translating a book on our platform or other platforms. So that if resources were not a problem, we would have contextualized stories in every possible way, not just translations. And the other is I love, Joanne, what you said is have a shift in mindset. And I think one of the things that we've tried to do in the last 1 year actually is get the teacher excited about storytelling, because we feel that the teacher can play a very important role in the classroom and outside of it as well. And if she's excited about storytelling, she will ensure that she will get a book to her child to read for fun and for joy.
Great, thank you, Purvi. And may I use this opportunity also to make this more of a collective audience question. I see Judith just answered that, we would also need lots of alphabet books about science, every topic that we're expanding kind of what books are about. But I want to make this question a little bit more interactive. That as an audience, what would you do? What's one thing you would change with your work, given more unlimited resources? While you think, you kind of type that answer, if I can turn it over to Amanda.
Sure. I think for both one course and one test, one thing I would love to do, and we're working towards it, is to optimize it for children, like all these learning opportunities, to optimize them for children with learning difficulties and disabilities. Like, we know that both of what we have to offer do work for a lot of children with disabilities at the moment. When one test was being tested in Malawi by children, there was a girl with nonverbal cerebral palsy using the test, and the teachers were really surprised at how well she was doing, that how much she knew. And that, to me, that sort of sign of potential just strengthens the case for ensuring that, you know, we're achieving SDG 4, we're making sure all of this is available for all children. So I think we're getting there, but there's always more we can be doing.
Perfect, thanks, Amanda. I see another great point made by Judith in our chat saying, you know, she would want all books in appropriate sign languages and audio versions, which is, you know, definitely highly needed to make reading more accessible. Any other kind of last minute comments or add-ins from the audience about, you know, one thing you would add on to this model? All right, well, we'll wait for any additional points to come in. I just want to conclude the session by, you know, thanking our panelists so very much for sharing your insights today. It was great to learn about Worldreader, Pratham Books, and 1 billion in more detail, and really to see how many of your platforms are so integrated and working off each other, that we all really are working towards the same goal of solving the literacy crisis. And I think, you know, a couple key takeaways for me today, you know, one is the power of community, right? That it really seemed to be the main focus here, that, right, that it's not just focusing on the child, but it's focusing on the teachers and mainly the parents, and what children can learn kind of in the quote unquote off hours outside of the classroom, which we know was a large portion of their time, especially during the pandemic. So it's taking this wider view of, you know, what can we do to really empower the community to focus on learning. You know, naturally in this symposium, you know, another would be the power of technology here, of, you know, really making reading tools accessible to a wide audience, both, you know, who have, you know, digital connectivity versus, you know, sometimes even just low tech options, and really the power of doing so. And, you know, it was touched upon, I think, in a little bit in the chat, but, you know, also the power of data here for getting information back of, you know, how your users are using your platforms, what's working, what's not working, and being able to have an agile model that's adapted to the various contexts. So it's been a pleasure to be part of this conversation. You know, really a big round of applause to Deborah, Purvi, Amanda, and Joan for their contributions. And I think it's been a great addition to our symposium. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christin.
Mm-hmm.